I am finding myself moved this morning by the beginning of Rosemary Traumer's poem. She writes, "Believing it matters. Today I will bless all that seems unable to grow." It's the believing that matters, believing it matters part that gets me. Because for me, so much of what we do, I'm not always sure if it matters. We just witnessed more mass shootings this month. Some of the most toxic public voices that call for violence and exclusion, have been allowed back on the biggest platforms. And then just this week, we saw the brutal footage of another Black man killed by law enforcement. Say his name, Tyre Nichols. And so we here this morning will have to be forgiven if sometimes we don't feel that it matters, if sometimes we cannot muster the will to believe that it matters, much less to act as if it matters, much less to bless the world as if that mattered. The poet packs so much into those first three words of her poem, believing it matters. Yes, it takes so much to believe that it matters. Now, our faith draws from two different taproots, the Unitarian and the Universalist taproots. And the Universalist side of our heritage builds upon a legacy of people who did act as if it mattered. And their belief was that they are the hands and feet for love in the world. They were called upon to embody love in the world. And they took this love to be a force that is beyond human control and is rather in itself divine. It is something that we can only give ourselves over to and hope that we might be able to live a part of it out in the world. Their belief was that this divine love was so pervasive, so all-conquering, that's their words, that no one could finally be excluded from its embrace, and so therefore all they could do was give themselves over to this all-conquering love. Of course, the Universalists, known as the faith of no hell, rejected the doctrine of eternal punishment, and that is what they are most known for. But their belief was also more than this. It's that at the deepest level, we are all included in the circle of love. We are all capable of love. We have all been touched by love. We can give ourselves over to love, and love will finally be the thing that changes our world for the better. George de Benneville was a Universalist preacher in the 1700s, and he preached the gospel of love. And this is how he put it: the spirit of love will be intensified to divine proportions when reciprocal love exists between the entire human race and each of its individual members. He said that the differences that we experience, the many differences in culture, in race, in creed, those differences are not finally obstacles to that divine love. He believed that universalism could offer an answer to the divisions that characterized humanity and culture. He was a passionate abolitionist, and he sought to share that message of love even as others thought that his commitment to social change was deeply improbable. And indeed, he would die long before slavery was outlawed in the United States. But nonetheless, his universalism urged him to topple institutions that failed to proclaim the wide and generous vision of the human race that he believed his universalist faith called him towards. De Benneville was one of the earliest universalist preachers. However, he does not hold the distinction of being its first figurehead. That distinction goes to John Murray. And some of you may be familiar with the story of John Murray and his arrival in the United States. He sailed over here from Britain, having preached the doctrine of universal love there, where he was chased from one town to the next. He left Britain feeling like a broken man and felt that he could no longer live his call to be a preacher. He said that his fondest wish was that he could simply become lost in America. And as he's sailing over to the United States, the wind changes course and he gets stranded for a couple of days in New Jersey. He was on his way to New York. And while he's there, he stays with this man who owns a farm. His name is Thomas Potter. And Thomas Potter had built a chapel. And Thomas Potter felt that he was just waiting for the right preacher with the right message to arrive. And so that week, he asked John Murray what Murray did when he was in Britain. And Murray said, well, I was a preacher. And he said, well, what did you preach? He was like, universal love. And he was like, you are the one. I want you to be the person to preach in my chapel on my farm. And John Murray resisted and said, no, I don't want to do that. But Thomas Potter was just insistent, and he kept asking and asking. And finally, John Murray said, well, here's the deal. If the wind doesn't change by Sunday and my boat does not sail away, I will preach in your chapel. The wind did not change, and the rest is history. The story of universalism continues in the United States for at least another 2.5 centuries. And that includes Hosea Ballou, who as a kid loved to jump in the mud and then went on to proclaim that no matter how tainted, how dirty, how problematic human beings could become, they too are not excluded from the circle of love. But this story is an interesting one for another reason besides just the figures who populate it. It's interesting because of how its ideas took shape. It started as a relatively abstract theological controversy. It was an argument over a Christian doctrine, the doctrine of eternal damnation and punishment. The early Universalists argued that there is not a lot of scriptural evidence for the doctrine of eternal damnation, and they are right about that. That doctrine was not developed until later in Christian history, and many found it quite challenging to reconcile something like divine goodness and love with an idea that that divine goodness and love will entail the eternal torment of a certain portion of the human race. But what's interesting to me is that Universalism didn't stay simply in that theological argument. And instead, that theological argument evolved seamlessly into what would become a powerful social critique. The Universalists became increasingly involved in social issues, and that it spans from abolitionism to women's suffrage, to prison reform, to ameliorating poverty. And rather than being extraneous to the theological tradition that they were coming from, these social impulses became part and parcel to it. The basic belief was that if no one could be excluded from the circle of love, if no one could be damned to hell, then how the hell can we damn people to suffer here on earth? Now, there's something that I have found quite interesting in recent years. And it's that a number of people who are not associated with Unitarian Universalism, and of course we are the inheritors, the denominational inheritors of the legacy of de Benneville and John Murray and Hosea Ballou, but a number of folks today who do not identify with Unitarian Universalism and instead are associated with more traditional Christian denominations have taken up arguing theological universalism. And they are arguing from within their religious homes for the core message and good news of universalism. And their message is that no one is finally excluded from divine love, that all in the end shall be saved. One of the most sensitive and sophisticated arguments for universal salvation in recent years comes from the Greek Orthodox theologian David Bentley Hart. His book is called That All Might Be Saved. And when I say his book is sophisticated, he's a philosopher and a philosopher of religion, and he's often dealing with abstruse philosophy and theology and unpicking some really quite complex and sometimes even obscure arguments in this book. It's not always an easygoing read, but there are moments in his theologizing that glimmer with the possibilities of radical social critique. Just as our early Universalist forebears saw that there was a deep social critique embedded within universalism, so too does Bentley Hart see something similar in his universalism. To make this argument, the author talks about our human imagination of hell. And his conviction is that this idea of hell, held onto by so many people so passionately, this idea of hell twists our human imagination of what love and justice should look like. As an example, he quotes Dante. And this is what Dante puts on the gates of hell in his book, The Inferno. Through me is the way to the city of woe. Through me is the way to eternal pain. Through me is the way to a lost people. Justice moved my creator. Divine power made me from supreme wisdom and a primal love. Before me, nothing else was created. Nothing but the eternal, and I last eternally. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Now, I agree with Bentley Hart about this quotation. These lines from Dante's Inferno lay bare the perversity of the doctrine of eternal damnation and punishment. Because inscribed here on the gates of hell, the entrance to this place where people will be punished for all eternity, is the notion that God was moved to create hell from an impulse of nothing other than justice and love. And I really think that that just about says it all, right? In this imagining, love looks like exclusion and harm. Love looks like irreconciliation and the refusal to forgive. Justice takes the shape of violence. It takes the shape of spite. Wisdom prompts cruelty and inspires hopelessness. you might be able to see now what I am getting at. The argument for universalism is not simply an argument over some obscure religious doctrine. It's not something that belongs in the past. Instead, it is an argument for exactly how we imagine justice here in this world, now, today. By saying that all shall be saved, the universalists insisted that love was not limited, but rather was broad and inclusive. By insisting that all shall be saved, they insisted that all persons deserved their share of justice. Believing it matters, they fought for a better vision. For a very long time, I would have said that I was more inspired by the Unitarian side of our heritage. And I particularly appreciate its respect for reason and its belief in the goodness of humanity. But today, for a moment like this, as we see racist violence that continues to plague law enforcement, as we see the LGBTQ community targeted with book bannings and exclusionary laws, as we hear fascist sympathies voiced on the largest platforms, as we see gun violence and mass shootings rock our country, as we see people create hell here on earth, I can't help but think that universalism is coming to a new relevance. That our task is to live the message that no one should be excluded from the circle of love. No one can be excluded from the circle of love. And that our mission is to spread the good news that everyone is, in the last estimate, embraced. This is the deepest impulse of who we are and who we want to be in the world. This is us embodying a love that is worth calling divine. Now, we are starting our pledge drive today. And when people ask me why I support Unitarian Universalism, why I continue to find its message inspiring, this is it. This is why. Because its message is deep and humane and good, and I do not want to see it disappear from the world without a trace. I believe in its message. I believe in its big heart. And so today, believing it matters, may we choose to bless the broken, bless all that seems unable to grow, bless it with fire, bless it with tears, bless it from our conviction, our heritage, our heart, bless it even if the wind decides to change.